welcome everybody. So talking to you from the West Coast here. It's 9 a.m. my time, so pretty bright and early, but I'm guessing it's going to be almost lunchtime for a lot of you. Today we're going to be unleashing the power of Esri's Field Maps Designer. So first things first, why use Field Maps Designer? What is Field Maps Designer? So Field Maps Designer is one of Esri's tools for inspections and data collection. They have a couple of different options out there, but Field Maps is one that's particularly easy to use and can be used to automate a lot of data collection, which is going to be one of the kind of main focal points, I think, for this webinar. We also have the option for real-time data presentations and analysis on anything that we collect. So again, I think we're kind of in this phase now where we're trying to transition away from, your pen and paper, your clipboard collections out in the field and trying to use and leverage more technology. And so field maps, using that GIS technology is a really easy way to kind of incorporate some of those workflows and get everything collected that you need. Field Maps Designer is also available for ArcGIS Enterprise 10.8.1 and newer, and ArcGIS Online, and of course supported on our major mobile platforms of iOS and Android. All right, so how do we automate data collection? So in addition to in the field, your typical, even on like a, for your clipboard type collection, you would be writing things down, checking off boxes. We can do all that in a digital format here with data collection and field maps, but we can also use ArcGIS Arcade, which is a scripting tool that Esri provides for kind of automating and calculating a lot of information. The first item we have here is you can populate fields based on user profile. So gone are the days where you have to go and write your name down and even the date and what time you collected something at. All that stuff can just be pulled in directly. Really cool and really powerful tool here, especially when you want to keep track of who's doing the collecting, when it was collected, all very important stuff. We also have the ability to retrieve attribute values from other layers in the field map itself. So the way that this is going to work is, say you had some other data in there, right? I don't know, maybe you have something like a zone, right? You're doing an inspection in a particular zoning area and you can pull that zone name into your inspection automatically. So again, I think the idea is trying to cut back on what your field crews are trying to process and do while they're in the field, and just try to get them to focus specifically on like zeroing in on just collecting the data they need to collect. A relatively new idea here is we have edit context handling. So this is just making sure that certain fields are only populated when we have new features. So you can have this set in a way where I think date is probably the best option, and we'll kind of go over this a little bit in the more demo portion of this. But for dates, we usually want to collect the specific time that something was actually registered, right? Not so much when someone after the fact is going in and making adjustments to the data. We want to know exactly when it was collected. With this edit context handling, you can have an arcade script that'll take this information and say, hey, this is a brand new one. I know I need a new date for it. Versus, hey, this has already been added before. We're not going to change that date because we don't really care when it was changed. We care about when it was first collected. And of course, there's many uses for arcade. There's a whole other webinar full of material you could create with just all the arcade stuff that's available to you. So I think a lot of times when we talk about data collection, a really important component is, what are we using this data for? Like, why are we collecting it? Who is our target audience for it? What do we do with it? And so ArcGIS, a lot of times that, especially in kind of the web platform, is going to be dashboards, other web maps, things to that effect, where we're just putting the data somewhere where it can either be viewable to the public, some kind of important stakeholder, maybe decision makers, right? So how do we present this data in a way that's going to make sense and it's going to kind of streamline that data decision process? So here, dashboards, you have the ability to summarize and filter your data. You can also view real-time progress of field crews. So if you had a stack of papers that were being collected from like your clipboards, you're gonna have to flip through all of those, whereas here you'd be able to see in real time the actual list of that data, right, all together. To that point a little bit, we actually also have the ability to create joins on data. And what this means is essentially what we're collecting versus what we're looking at. We can kind of join those together and have advanced symbology in the map itself to show you what still needs to be collected and what's already been collected. A little bit in the weeds, and it'll kind of make more sense to see it visually, which we'll get to here. The last element is just making sure to filter data metrics by date and location. This is obviously very important to us, GIS professionals. That's kind of like the main crux of what we do, is just making sure that we have that location down and where something is happening. Easier to see that visually than in some kind of clipboard, some kind of like collected paper. So with that, I think it makes sense to kind of just jump in and see how field maps works. All right, so the first thing that I want to go over is this is just a web map. Very simple and straightforward. For those of you who use ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise, you should be able to, kind of recognize some of these elements here. But all we're doing is we're just creating a web map, and we're including our various layers in here. So to give some context as far as this demo and how I've kind of got it set up, wanted to stick with that idea of the unleashing, kind of like parks, dog parks. Here, I used to live and work in the city of Menifee out here in California. And so I thought I'd show us some California data, maybe mix things up a little bit, see some different scenery. Um, the actual layer itself that we're going to be operating on, and you'll see I have a couple different items in here to use, but it's going to be this Menifee Parks. I'm going to go ahead really quick and just open this up and show you what this data looks like so we can get a feel for how stuff is being collected and kind of processed here. So typically when we design a layer to be acceptable to field maps to be collected on, we don't want to, usually at least, edit the kind of parent data, is what we would call it, or the authoritative data. So in this case, say we have an authoritative parks layer. This is the layer that everyone's coming to. When they look at the City of Menifee's website, this is the data, right? We don't want to mess with that. And so what we end up doing is we have this sort of base data where we're putting in all the park names, all of our park IDs and our addresses. So the very kind of overview type data, right? But what we're also doing is creating a related table for collecting all of our inspections. So what this does is we have a one-to-many relationship between both the parks and the inspections. So for example, this Audie Murphy Ranch Sports Park, both of these are individual inspections. They can be parsed out, they can be processed separately together, but they're not affecting that original parks data. We're not making duplicate points, right? We're only ever operating on one point. They just have multiple records to them. And in fact, if I were to scroll all the way over here, giving us a little brief preview of what data we're going to be collecting today. We have this little class here, and this is going to be our relationship class. So it's telling us this is related back to that parks. And in fact, if I were to click this little show, it'll take us back to that parent relationship with Audie Murphy Ranch Sports Park. A little bit in the weeds here, and it's maybe a little bit beyond the scope of exactly everything we're trying to do with field maps today, but I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what this data looks like before we jump in so it's not too confusing, like what's kind of going on. In some, we're taking the parks. We're going to be having field crews find that park in the map, tap on it, and add an inspection record, which is going to be these little these table records here that are going to be pulling in. Oops, let me just go back here. Got kind of stuck there. They're going to be collecting these little inspections that are going to be attached to that park. So you'll be able to have multiple per park. The last thing to kind of highlight here, as far as getting the data set up, I actually went ahead and created a join on this data. So as we saw, we have both parks and we have a table. And tables, unfortunately, don't have geometry associated with them. So you can't actually visualize that in the map. So the way that we work around this is we have the option to create a view layer and a join view layer. Again, going a little bit beyond field maps, but kind of trying to bring it together. By creating a joined view layer, what we can do is say, here's the park geometry. I want to merge it with the actual inspection. That way I can kind of visually see where all my inspections are happening. So if I were to go down into these other views that I've already pre-created, they're named, I think it's logical to name it by the actual layer name and then the inspection, and then whether it's all of them or just the most recent ones. You can configure that depending on how you set up this join. But if we were to hop into the all one and very quickly look over our data, You can see that we have all of our park information, as well as, if I scroll further down, all of our inspection information. So it seems a little bit like we're kind of adding more work to it, but this extra legwork is actually really important, because if I were to hop over into our visualization now, and we see, it's going to move us all the way out here. If I were to click on, say, this Audie Murphy Ranch Sports Park, you'll notice that we have 2 points here. So 1 and 2, and they're each representing the different inspections that were done that I showed in that table. And so having a geometry associated with them, an actual visual aid, is really helpful for field crews, and we'll explain kind of why that is when we get to that portion kind of coming up. But just keep in mind that this is the best way to kind of keep everything all together, so we can see, in real time, what are we updating, what still needs to be done. Okay, that's enough prep stuff. Let's go ahead and actually hop over or back over to our map. Field Maps Designer, essentially, it's going to be a series of forms that you can kind of put together for collecting data in the field. And the way that we get to it is we just create a web map. Any web map will do, as long as your data has edits enabled on it. If I were to open in Web Maps Designer here, it should pop open with the actual interface. Beautiful. If I were to hop over now to the left side here on forms, right now it's going to be empty, because by default it wants us to look at the layers, and you'll see I have it empty for the parks so far. These two aren't editable, which is why they're grayed out. We don't want to edit the parks though. Remember, what we want to do is make edits to the actual related records. So if I go down here to tables and then park inspections, this is where you would set everything up and kind of where the magic happens. So essentially what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create an ideal form that people out in the field can use to collect all of their data. And this is going to be a mixture of what I have here is calculated values, as well as user inputs, user determined values. And so when you first load into this, it's going to be completely blank. And so I kind of took the liberty of just putting things together so we can, kind of show off a little bit more of the capabilities without getting too far in the weeds. But this very first top one here is just going to be your form title. These curly braces notate whatever field name. So you can see I just picked from this drop down, the little dash there to separate it, and then the inspection date. So as soon as your field crew puts in a new or wants to add a new record, it's going to have this title at the top, which is why it's kind of useful to have that. They know what time they're collecting it and what park they're collecting it on. These little sections down here are called groups. This kind of, it's a little tough to see maybe, but it's this sort of white, it's turning blue as I hover over it. You're able to create these groups. And so what you might want to do is, let's say you have a lot of data, right? And you want to group them together by, similarities. Or in this case, what I did was I wanted to have all my calculated values separated out from my user input values. And so I made 2 separate groups for them. And then I just dragged in, it's very straightforward here. You just take one of these fields and you can drag it right inside. The groups themselves in this form element, you would just drag in a whole group and you can plop it in wherever you'd like to. But again, I want to get this kind of set up so we could go a little bit quicker through it. Calculated values here. So we have the park name and the park ID. So all we're doing with these, again, the calculated values, they're just being pulled in directly from the parent. It's saying, hey, I'm related to this park, and so I need this park name and I need this park ID. And the way these are handled is you can insert at the bottom here some arcade expressions. I'll go through the inspection date one here. So you can see, and also too, just to kind of quickly, you'll notice that the types of items we have in here do change depending on the field type. Very similar to how you might set up like a pop-up or like a, just when you're kind of designing your data before you publish it, you have different types of fields or different types of information you can set depending on what type of data you're looking at. But if I were to go in this inspection date, I did really want to show, again, that automation process. How do we get from, enabling our field crews to just automatically populate our data and have it just come in without them needing to find it themselves? At the very bottom, we can go to this calculated expression, and we have all of them in here, but the one that has the check mark is the one that's currently being used. If I go and click into our Edit Arcade, you can see that we have kind of a simple-ish arcade, but if you haven't seen this before, it can be a little jarring. This is just an if else statement. All it's saying is, hey, if this is an insert data type, it's that edit context that we talked about before, where Arcade is smart enough to know, hey, if this is a brand new feature, in other words, an insert is what the operation is technically called, then I just need to return the current date and time. This is the live inspection right now. I just need whatever the time is. So just grab that and pull it in. But otherwise, assuming that it's a different type of edit, so we're just editing the data directly, we're just gonna, even if you're just moving the point, any of those types of edits are going to be considered not a new insert because we're not putting a new point in, or sorry, a new inspection record in. And so it's just going to return the existing time, date and time. This way, again, for your crew who are out in the field collecting the data, we want to know what that specific time is, but maybe not the time that someone went in and modified the data after that. If we were to kind of scroll down, we do have a couple more in here. So the inspector email, similar idea. We're just looking at who is logged in at this time and return that email for that person. So that's kind of what is getting shown here. And again, we go through the actual app itself and what's being shown. It'll show how that's automated. And then for temperature, this is another one that I did want to highlight as far as the calculation goes, because we do have the option to pull in data from other sources. So the other items in there are all pulling data either being calculated, so date and time, or from the user. Here, we're also able to pull from existing data that may not be like the parent, the original parks data. So we have our stations. This is just a brand new layer that exists inside that web map. And so what it's doing is it's searching for the Hemet station. Hemet is a city that's really close to Menifee, and it's the nearest weather station. So what it's doing is it's just pulling in our temperature. I do have some handling here for errors just in case. And again, whole other world of arcade scripts that you can get into as far as that. That's a separate topic maybe. But I just want to highlight that it is important to make sure your scripts are set up correctly. If there was a null value and say it got populated as a 0 instead of specifically null, obviously 0 is theoretically a temperature that could exist. Maybe not in Hemet, California, but it could exist in the real world. And so we don't want to muddy up our data by not accounting for certain situations. And then last but not least, as far as the form goes, this is kind of the important stuff, right? This is what we're really trying to make sure that we have, because we need field crew to go out there and make sure they're grabbing this stuff for us. But I have it set up right now where the field crew is setting or going to find the condition for different facilities at each park. So whether it's picnic shelters, sports fields, or playgrounds, they're basically just rating them on a scale of 1 to 5. And I can show that here. In this input type, I have a combo box, which is showing the dropdown. It doesn't really preview the dropdown, but I can show if we were to switch it really quick to radio buttons. They're basically just picking a score 1 through 5. This way they don't put something in weird, 6, or they put in something like a, 1.2. They're just putting in exactly what we're predefining in our layer configuration that we'd set initially. It's grayed out here, so I can't really make changes, and that's due to the fact that we have a view attached to it. So one thing I maybe mention and really should mention is that when you do joins on layers, whether it's that join view that we showed or just a different type of join, or a different type of view, it can cause problems when editing schema. And so it's kind of locking us out of being able to change what these values are until I were to go in and break that join and recreate it. So just keep that in mind that it can have a little bit of changes there, but that's why you can't see them in this format. But we're going to put this back in the combo box. So once they input all of these different items, it's going to go through a calculation of the average. Now, again, I did put these up at the top in this calculated values, all the other calculations, but I thought it made more sense to kind of see in real time what the average is as the user's putting information in. So we could just leave that. And then the final option here is inspection notes. So keeping with our theme, the unleashing the dog park stuff, I do have dog friendly park as a default value that comes in. Keep in mind that all of these could be, we have drop downs, so we could put different options in there. We also could make things required or not required. When I was kind of designing this and going through it, I was just thinking, I guess this is less of like a field crew and more of like if we had like the public going out and collecting data. I think it's better to kind of account for them not filling everything in, because if you have a required field and they're not really trained to collect it the right way, they tend to just put random things, and that's kind of less helpful. So I didn't make anything required technically in here except for the stuff that's calculated, because that's just automatically pulled in. But you absolutely could make one of these required, and your field crew would know they need to fill this in before they can submit. But thinking with the conditions, I thought, well, if they don't have a sports field, for example, maybe we just leave it blank, and that way we know that there's nothing that they can change in there. But what I did set here is I put in this little placeholder text, and typically people will use this for things like hints, right? So something like an example of what type of text to put in here. You can also use the description thing from before to put your hints down there. But what I did was I put this dog-friendly park as a placeholder, and then hopping over to our little template side, I'm gonna go ahead and discard our changes. We didn't really change much. And then go in here. You have the option to put default values directly into your field map. So why might this be useful? Obviously, you can set default values in the data directly, and a number of different ways you can set default values, pro or just online, however you want to set that up. But I figured it'd be good to show it in field map specifically, because there might be situations where your editing crew, maybe back in the office, doesn't want that default value. It's just a default value specifically for when data is being collected in the field. And so this gives us that kind of flexibility. But by setting dog friendly park here, it's going to become our new default value. The issue is that if I didn't place it here, if it was just blank, you would have no idea that was the default value. So that's why I put it as this placeholder text for now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist of it as far as the kind of setting this up. I think we can go ahead and take a look at what this is going to look like for folks in the field. So to make this simple, I went ahead and recorded this as opposed to trying to call in with my phone and do it in real time. It's just a little bit more cumbersome. But now I'm going to try to keep up with the speed of the video here. So we're going to go ahead and play that. So you can see we're here in field maps. We just open it up on our phone, and we have our different points here. I'll note that some have green rings and one does not. This is what I was talking about, where if we use that join layer, we can symbolize it and filter out by only those that have been complete, leaving the one that hasn't been complete yet by itself. So it's missing that date, so we know it needs to be done still. So zooming into it and then tapping on it, we have our park name at the top, and then we have the park ID and the address. Those are coming from the parent feature. But again, we don't want to edit this directly. We want to edit those relates. Click on relate there. And now we have the option to either add a new inspection or to edit an old one. So we're going to add a new one. At the very top, you can see that the name has already come in. We have our park, and then we also have the date. And then the very first thing to show, that calculated values, that was where that group came from. It was condensed initially, so we can expand it and look in there and see what's changed. Grabbed our date, which is perfect. You can see when I made this last night. And then we also have our inspector email was pulled in, and then the temperature too. As far as the user inputs go, it's very straightforward. So we're gonna rate them. Picnic shelter, I've been to this park. It's about a 3, I would say. There were no sports parks or sports fields, so we're going to leave that one blank and skip straight to playground condition, which we will set at 5. And you can see at the bottom there, our inspection notes, it's already kind of pre-filled in for us, our dog-friendly park. So that's how those default values would come through for your field crew. It would just already be in there for them. They would click that little X to clear it if they wanted to put something that wasn't the default value. And then we should be getting very close to just kind of submitting this here. I'm sure my timing was a little bit different when I was going through this, but this is sort of what your field crew would be looking at. And again, it looks just like a form, so it would hopefully be an adequate replacement for just using your clipboards. So click submit there, and then that got sent off to be done. And then I think here I might just show what everything looks like. It's all collected, the data is in there, and the average is calculated as well in there. If I to click the little X though, you can see we have our other entries. And I did very briefly want to show that in the older entry, if I were to come into this, and if I were to go to edit at the bottom there, and we open up that calculated values, we can see it up in the title, it did not change that inspection date. So previously it did give us the brand new one, brand new last night, but when it was recorded. And then we have the inspection date from the old time. Since we're making an edit to it, it didn't change. And so that's kind of what we want to see with that edit context handling, right? We're not changing, it's just pulling in the new information. Or rather, it's keeping the old information. The last thing to show with this, I'm just going to discard these edits, and I'm going to quickly close out of field maps. When it first, I was hoping by scrolling it would update, but it didn't. So we're going to have to kind of close out of this map and then reload it. Here's what field maps kind of looks like for us here. By reloading it, and you'll briefly see where I'm currently at, we go back up to Menifee where our data is being collected, and you'll notice that we have a green ring around it. So again, the way this green ring works is we have that join. So it's saying, hey, here's our data. And then it's joined with that most recent inspection time. It saw that new date, so it no longer filtered it out. Boom, it's in there. So we can see that green ring. Field crew knows, hey, it's done. And if we were in the office using a dashboard, we would also see those green rings and know that it's complete. So to kind of round out and kind of wrap up this little presentation here on build maps, what do we do with this data, right? What are we processing it? How is it going to look? This is a dashboard. And so all we're doing is we're taking our picnic shelter scores and averaging them out. It is filtered. So if I were to move out here, you'll see nothing, but it'll kind of, depending on where the map is positioned. So this could be useful depending on if you're presenting to someone, you'd be able to zoom in and filter all this data out. We're collecting all of our different scores and then doing an average score at the end. And then we also have our total inspections, which we have 14, and we have our public comments. So the public comments, again, I was kind of envisioning this as like a public person collecting this. Totally up to you how you'd want to design your forms. And obviously some planning goes into how you want to set this up so it makes the most sense for your use. But here I'm envisioning maybe we have like a city council that wants to know how the parks are doing, right? What does the public think of the parks? Where can we improve the parks? And that's kind of what this is sort of trying to capture. We have our comments for people who are either complaining about the park or just have, maybe good things to say about it. And then we can also filter it down by individual park. So you can see those green rings went away because we are just focusing on this Audie Murphy Ranch. Altering our picnic score, or all of our scores really, depending on what's being selected. And then we could also even filter down by year if we wanted to. You'll notice if I were to do 2024 here, there are no public comments. So again, we left it where it's not a required field. They could put information in if they want to, but we just didn't have anything in there. So they left it blank. And so I filtered out all of our nulls so we don't see a bunch of nulls in here. So we'll just say no data, but again, that could be a required field that maybe you want to collect information on, and so they'll always be populated. But yeah, we can filter out for both years, and it looks like, yeah, our parks maybe are kind of decreasing over time and not as great as they once were. But